Growing up, I was the golden child, dutiful, obedient, and eager to please. My parents showered me with love, bedtime stories, park outings, and proud displays of my artwork on the fridge. But everything changed the moment Mike was born. It was as if an invisible switch flipped, and I became a ghost in my own home. The warmth I once felt evaporated, replaced by a chilling indifference. One incident still haunts me. I tripped down the stairs, landing hard on the cold floor, tears streaming down my face from both pain and shock. Instead of rushing to comfort me, my parents simply muttered, "Get up, you're fine." No hugs, no doctor visits, just dismissal. Meanwhile, when Mike scraped his knee weeks later, it was utter chaos. My mom panicked. My dad called the pediatrician and they rushed him to urgent care like he'd been gravely injured. That day I realized how disposable I had become. Their love wasn't just unequal, it was cruelly conditional. This sudden shift left me reeling. What had I done to deserve this? Was I not enough anymore? These questions gnawed at me as I watched Mike effortlessly claim every ounce of their affection. Each small act of neglect a forgotten promise. A stolen moment of attention chipped away at my sense of self-worth. This is where my story begins, rooted in betrayal and heartbreak, setting the stage for everything that followed. The disparity in how my parents treated Mike and me became painfully clear as we grew older. My 10th birthday was supposed to be a milestone, but it turned into one of the most humiliating days of my childhood. For months, I had dropped hints about the bike. I wanted cutting out magazine pictures, casually mentioning it during dinner, even writing a wish list that included only one item, a simple red bicycle. On the morning of my birthday, I woke up brimming with hope, imagining myself riding through the neighborhood like the other kids. But when I unwrapped my presents, all I found were clothes and books, practical, impersonal, and utterly disappointing. 2 weeks later, without any occasion or explanation, my parents surprised Mike with a brand new top-of-the-line mountain bike. It wasn't just expensive. It was extravagant, a gleaming symbol of their favoritism. When I asked why he got a bike and I didn't, they dismissed me with a laugh, saying, "Mike needs more exercise. You're fine without one." Fine. Was I merely fine now? This pattern of neglect followed me into school, where I poured my heart into academics, hoping for recognition. In middle school, I won the title of top student, an achievement I worked tirelessly for. Yet, when I brought home the certificate, my parents barely glanced at it before moving on to talk about Mike's football practice. A year later, when Mike placed second in a local art contest, a minor accomplishment compared to my academic honors, they threw him a lavish celebration. The entire family gathered for a catered dinner, complete with balloons and a personalized cake. Watching them cheer for Mike while ignoring my hard-earned success felt like a punch to the gut. Each moment chipped away at my self-worth, leaving me hollow and questioning if I would ever be enough. These incidents weren't isolated, they formed a toxic pattern that shaped our family dynamic. Every small act of dismissal reinforced the belief that I was invisible, undeserving of love or acknowledgement. This relentless favoritism planted seeds of resentment, pushing me further away from the family I once craved acceptance from. The financial exploitation I endured at the hands of my family was yet another layer of betrayal that left me feeling utterly powerless. At 16, when I finally landed my first part-time job at a local bookstore, I thought I'd found a lifeline, a way to escape their control and build something for myself. Every paycheck felt like a small victory, proof that I could succeed on my own terms. But my parents had other plans. Mike, then 13, complained incessantly about how unfair it was that I had spending money while he didn't. Instead of teaching him patience or encouraging him to earn his own income, they forced me into an outrageous arrangement. I had to hand over half of my earnings each month to Mike. Half? My hard-earned money I'd sacrificed weekends and late nights for was being funneled directly into his frivolous habits. He blew it all on video games, junk food, and useless gadgets, while I scrimped and saved just to afford school supplies. But the financial abuse didn't stop there. As we grew older, Mike began treating my belongings as if they were his own. Clothes, electronics, even my car. Once I got my license, he took whatever he wanted without asking. One particularly devastating incident occurred during my senior year of high school. I had been working tirelessly on a major project, relying heavily on my laptop to meet deadlines. When Mike borrowed it without permission and accidentally destroyed it, I expected our parents to intervene and hold him accountable. Instead, they turned the blame back on me. "You should have taken better care of your things," they scolded, as though I was the one who had acted irresponsibly. Their refusal to acknowledge Mike's wrongdoing only deepened my sense of injustice. The final straw came when I discovered what Mike had done with Grandma's nequesa, cherished heirloom she had given me before passing away. It wasn't just jewelry. It was a symbol of her love and wisdom, something I held sacred. Imagine my horror when I found out Mike had pawned it to buy credits for an online game. I confronted him in tears, demanding answers, but he shrugged it off as if it were no big deal. When I pleaded with my parents to step in, they dismissed my anguish with a casual, "It's just an old piece of jewelry. You need to learn to forgive." Forgive. How could I forgive when their actions or lack thereof made it clear that my feelings, my memories, and my possessions meant nothing compared to Mike's fleeting desires? These incidents weren't isolated. They formed a pattern of entitlement and neglect that stripped me of my dignity. Each time I tried to assert myself, I was met with resistance or outright hostility. The message was clear. My needs didn't matter. This relentless disregard for my well-being pushed me further away from the family I once longed to belong to, solidifying my resolve to carve out a life where I wouldn't be taken advantage of anymore. The breaking point in my relationship with my family came during my sophomore year of college, an event so devastating that it shattered any lingering hope I had for fairness or reconciliation. Photography had become my sanctuary, a creative outlet that allowed me to escape the suffocating dynamics at home. For months, I scrimped and saved every penny from my part-time job, carefully researching cameras until I found the perfect one, a high-quality DSLR that would elevate my work to the next level. It wasn't just a purchase, it was a dream within reach. Finally, after weeks of winter break spent hoarding cash in a small wooden box under my bed, I felt ready to claim this piece of happiness. But dreams are fragile things, especially when you live in a house where your needs are perpetually dismissed. One evening, as I rummaged through my room to retrieve the savings, my heart sank into my stomach. The box was empty. Every dollar I had painstakingly accumulated gone. Panic set in as I frantically searched every corner of my room, hoping against hope that I'd misplaced it. But deep down, I already knew who was responsible. When I confronted Mike later that night, he didn't even try to deny it. "Relax," he said with a smirk. "I needed it more than you." He admitted he'd taken the money to buy himself a new gaming console, acting as though his fleeting entertainment was worth more than my lifelong passion. What happened next still makes my blood boil. Instead of holding Mike accountable, my parents turned on me. They accused me of being careless, saying I should have hidden the money better. "You're always making excuses," my dad snapped, while my mom shook her head disapprovingly. Not once did they acknowledge the gravity of what Mike had done or the fact that he had stolen from his own sister. Their refusal to defend me wasn't just hurtful, it was humiliating. It was as if they believed I deserved to be robbed, because I dared to prioritize myself for once. The fallout was catastrophic. Without the camera, I couldn't complete my final project for my photography class, a project that accounted for half my grade. Worse still, I missed the deadline to enter a prestigious campus-wide photo competition, an opportunity I had been preparing for all semester. My professor, unaware of the circumstances, reprimanded me in front of the entire class, calling me irresponsible and uncommitted. I sat there, cheeks burning with shame, unable to explain the real reason behind my failure. How could I tell them that my own brother had sabotaged me and that my parents had blamed me for it? That incident became the catalyst for everything that followed. It wasn't just about the camera or the lost opportunities. It was the culmination of years of neglect, favoritism, and emotional manipulation. Every snide comment Mike made, every achievement of mine my parents ignored, every time they forced me to sacrifice for him, it all came crashing down on me that day. I realized then that no matter how hard I worked or how much I tried to prove myself, I would never be valued in my family's eyes. They saw me as disposable, someone whose needs could be sacrificed without consequence. In the weeks that followed, I began distancing myself emotionally and physically. I threw myself into my studies, working late nights at the library to avoid going home. When I did return, I kept interactions with my family to a minimum, retreating further into my shell. Mike continued to mock me, telling anyone who would listen that I thought I was too good for the family now. My parents joined in, criticizing me for becoming cold and ungrateful, yet their words barely registered anymore. By then, I had stopped expecting anything from them. This betrayal had stripped away whatever lingering attachment I had to them, leaving only resolve in its place. Looking back, that stolen camera marked the moment I finally understood the truth. My family would never change. No amount of forgiveness or patience could fix what was broken. From that day forward, I vowed to build a life where I wouldn't have to fight for scraps of love or validation. Life where I could thrive without their toxicity dragging me down. Little did I know, this decision would set the stage for the ultimate confrontation years later, when I refused to invite them to my wedding. After the camera incident shattered any remaining hope of fairness, I made a conscious decision to distance myself emotionally and physically from my toxic family. During college, I moved into a dorm and rarely returned home, using every excuse to avoid their suffocating presence. When I did visit, the atmosphere was always charged with tension. My parents criticized everything about me, my grades, my career choices, even my haircut, as if nothing I did could ever meet their impossibly high standards for Mike. But the worst came from Mike himself. One evening, During one of his harmless get-togethers with friends, he openly mocked me in front of everyone, calling me a loser because I didn't have a boyfriend. His words cut deep, not just because they were cruel, but because they echoed the same dismissive attitude I'd endured my entire life. Jake witnessed firsthand how my family's toxicity affected me. One night, after a particularly draining phone call with my parents, who accused me of being selfish for not caring enough about the family, I collapsed onto the couch, overwhelmed by stress. Jake found me trembling, unable to breathe properly. He held me close, letting me cry until the storm passed. That night, as he whispered words of reassurance, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Jake became my anchor, the person who reminded me that I deserved love and respect, not abuse, disguised as familial duty. With his support, I began to see myself differently, not as a victim trapped by circumstance, but as someone capable of creating her own future. Each small step away from my family felt like reclaiming pieces of myself, building a life where their voices no longer dictated my worth. The moment I broke the news about my wedding decision, all hell broke loose. I had spent weeks rehearsing how to tell my family that they wouldn't be invited to one of the most important days of my life. But nothing could have prepared me for the storm that followed. It started with a phone caller, seemingly innocent attempt to explain my reasoning. My mom answered, her voice trembling as she asked why their names weren't on the guest list. Before I could even finish my explanation, she erupted into hysterical sobs, accusing me of being heartless and selfish. "How could you do this to us?" she wailed, her cries escalating until she dropped the ultimate bombshell. "If you go through with this, I don't know how I'll live with myself." The implication was clear. She was threatening to harm herself if I didn't cave. Then came my dad, his tone icy and devoid of empathy. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, each word dripping with disdain. "If you think we'll ever leave anything to you in our will after this, you're wrong." His words hit like a dagger, not because I cared about their inheritance, but because it revealed just how transactional their love had always been. To them, my refusal wasn't about protecting my happiness. It was an act of betrayal, punishable by disownment. But the real chaos unfolded when Mike got involved. Within hours, my phone buzzed incessantly with angry texts from him, each one more venomous than the last. He called me every name under the sun: selfish, ungrateful, a disgrace to the family. Then, in a move so calculated it felt like a slap in the face, he took our private drama public. He posted on social media, spinning a twisted narrative where he was the victim and I was the villain. "My sister thinks she's too good for her own family," his post read. "She doesn't deserve happiness if she can treat people who love her this way." The comments flooded in, friends and acquaintances alike, piling on without knowing the full story. Some defended him. Others questioned my sanity. It was as though my entire identity had been reduced to a caricature of cruelty. Despite the onslaught, I refused to back down. Every insult, every threat, only reinforced my conviction that I was doing the right thing. Jake stood by me unwaveringly, reminding me that toxic relationships don't deserve a seat at the table of our future. Together, we fortified ourselves against their manipulation tactics, blocking numbers, securing vendor accounts, and hiring security for the venue. Still, the emotional toll was immense. Nights were filled with restless tossing and turning, replaying their accusations in my mind. Was I being too harsh? Could there still be room for reconciliation? But then I remembered everything: the stolen savings, the broken camera, the years of favoritism, and realized that this wasn't just about a wedding. It was about drawing a line in the sand, declaring that I would no longer tolerate being treated as disposable. The reactions weren't surprising, they were predictable, almost scripted. My mom's tears weren't genuine grief. They were guilt trips designed to control me. My dad's threats weren't expressions of hurt. They were attempts to assert dominance. And Mike's public smear campaign wasn't about justice, it was about revenge. Standing firm in my decision wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For the first time in my life, I chose myself over their expectations. The meeting at the cafe was supposed to be a chance for closure, but it quickly turned into one of the most unsettling confrontations of my life. My parents and Mike sat across from me, their expressions a mix of anger and desperation. As I calmly explained why I couldn't invite them to my wedding, detailing years of neglect, favoritism, and betrayal, I could see their defenses rising. But nothing prepared me for what came next. When it was Mike's turn to speak, he didn't deny his role in the camera incident. Instead, he admitted it with chilling nonchalance. "Yeah, I broke it on purpose," he said, smirking as if proud of himself. "You were always the golden child in everyone else's eyes, so I figured you needed to be taken down a peg." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the confession, it was the casual cruelty behind it. The way he laughed it off as though destroying something precious to me was no big deal. In that moment, I realized I wasn't looking at my brother anymore. I was staring at a stranger who harbored so much resentment that he'd deliberately sabotaged my dreams. But the worst part? My parents' reaction, or lack thereof. Instead of apologizing or showing any remorse, they immediately pivoted to damage control. Well, that was years ago, my mom interjected, waving her hand dismissively. Let's just move past it. Then, in a move so tone-deaf, it made my blood boil. My dad offered to pay for the camera twice, its original value if I agreed to invite them to the wedding. Money can fix this, right? He said, as if every wound they'd inflicted could be healed with a check. Their blatant attempt to buy their way back into my life only reinforced how little they understood me or valued anything beyond appearances. I wanted to scream, to shake them until they grasped the depth of their toxicity. But I didn't. I sat there clutching Jake's hand under the table, reminding myself why I had drawn this line in the first place. No amount of money or manipulation would make me compromise my peace. This isn't about the camera, I said firmly. It's about respect, something none of you have shown me. The room fell silent, their faces a mixture of shock and indignation. For the first time, I saw cracks in their carefully constructed facade. Yet, I knew better than to hope for real change. They weren't here to understand, they were here to win, and I refused to let them. Despite my clear boundaries, my family refused to respect them, escalating their interference to absurd levels. One afternoon, I was in the middle of an important meeting when a colleague interrupted, whispering that there was a distressed woman in the lobby demanding to see me. My stomach dropped as I realized who it was. Walking into the lobby, I found my mom sobbing uncontrollably, clutching a massive bouquet of flowers like a prop in her dramatic performance. She wailed about how she couldn't bear missing my wedding and begged me to reconsider. Her voice carried across the entire office, drawing stares from coworkers who didn't know the full story. Some even shot me sympathetic glances, likely assuming I was the unreasonable one. The humiliation burned through me as I tried to calm her down, but she only grew louder, insisting she had already bought a dress for the occasion. It felt like a calculated move to guilt-trip me in front of my colleagues. Meanwhile, Mike's antics took a darker turn. He somehow tracked down all our wedding vendors, impersonating Jake to request changes to the menu and even attempting to cancel contracts. When the venue coordinator called to confirm these updates, Jake and I were horrified. We immediately secured our accounts with passwords and hired additional security for the wedding day. Each new attempt by my family to sabotage our plans only deepened my resolve. Mike later sent an email apologizing for his behavior, but it came off as insincere. Since he attached a check for the camera he'd broken years ago, the gesture felt hollow, a desperate attempt to save face rather than a genuine effort to make amends. By then, their actions had proven beyond doubt that they still saw my boundaries as suggestions, not lines they needed to respect. The morning of my wedding was supposed to be a serene prelude to the happiest day of my life. But Mike and my parents had other plans. Despite my explicit wishes, they showed up uninvited at the venue an hour before the ceremony, dressed to the nines and armed with excuses. "We just want to celebrate our beloved daughter," my mom declared dramatically, as if their presence wasn't a calculated intrusion. My dad nodded solemnly while Mike lingered behind them, smirking like he'd already won some twisted game. The chaos began when they tried to bypass security, insisting they were family and therefore entitled to attend. Guests exchanged uneasy glances as the guards intervened, creating a tense standoff at the entrance. But the most harrowing moment came when Mike broke away from the group and stormed toward the bridal suite, claiming he needed to talk sense into me. Jake, who had been helping me adjust my veil, stepped in front of him with a calm yet firm demeanor. "You're not getting past this door," he said, his voice steady but laced with warning. Mike sneered, accusing Jake of brainwashing me and turning me against my own family. "She's making the biggest mistake of her life," he shouted, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. The argument escalated quickly, drawing stares from guests and staff alike. For a brief, terrifying moment, I thought Mike might physically push past Jake, but the security team arrived just in time to restrain him. As I stood frozen inside the room, listening to the commotion outside, I felt a surge of emotions, anger, fear, and even a flicker of guilt. Was this really how it would end? With my special day tainted by their selfishness? But then I remembered why I had drawn these boundaries in the first place. Years of neglect, manipulation, and betrayal. This wasn't about them wanting to celebrate MIT, was about control. Thankfully, the situation was diffused without further incident. Security escorted them off the premises, allowing me to breathe again. As I looked in the mirror, tears streaming down my face, I reminded myself that today was about love, the kind of love I deserved, not the toxic version they represented. Despite the storm clouds that had loomed over the days leading up to it, my wedding day dawned bright and beautiful. As I walked down the aisle, my eyes locked with Jake's, and for the first time in my life, I felt truly seen, truly loved. His gaze was filled with admiration and pride, emotions I had yearned for but never received from my own family. The ceremony unfolded without a hitch, surrounded by close friends and Jake's warm, supportive family. It was intimate, heartfelt, and everything I had ever dreamed of. The most unforgettable moment came during the reception when Jake picked up a guitar and began to sing a song he had written just for me. His voice trembled with emotion as he recounted my journey, the pain, the resilience, and finally, the triumph of choosing happiness on my own terms. By the end of the performance, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the staff wiped away tears as they watched the raw love and connection between us. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. Every sacrifice, every boundary I had set, it all led to this. I was proud of myself for standing firm, for creating a day that reflected who I am and the life I want to build with Jake. In the weeks following the wedding, I received a flood of messages from extended family members, some supportive, others laced with regret. A few relatives admitted they had misjudged me, confessing they now understood why I made the choices I did. "I'm sorry. We didn't stand by you sooner," one aunt wrote. "You looked so happy on your wedding day, and it made me realize how much strength it took to protect that happiness." These words, though late, carried weight. For the first time, I felt seen not as the difficult daughter or sister, but as someone who deserved respect. Mike's final email arrived a week later, his tone softer than before. He apologized again for trying to crash the wedding and revealed he'd started therapy to address his insecurities and past behavior. Enclosed was a check for double the value of the camera he'd destroyed, a gesture meant to make amends. But money wasn't what I wanted. "It's not about the camera," I replied firmly. "It's about respecting boundaries and understanding the pain you caused." His response was brief. "I get it now. I'll give you space." As for my parents, their silence spoke volumes. Through an intermediary, a distant relative, they expressed being heartbroken but acknowledged my need for distance. While part of me still craved reconciliation, another part knew this quiet acceptance was as close to closure as I'd ever get. Their lack of direct communication stung, yet I couldn't deny the relief in finally having peace. Our honeymoon in Greece was everything I had dreamed of and more. The sun-drenched beaches, cobblestone streets, and breathtaking sunsets felt like a world away from the chaos I'd left behind. For the first time in years, I felt truly free from the weight of my family's expectations, free from their toxicity. Jake and I spent hours exploring quaint villages, savoring local delicacies, and talking about our future. It was during one of these quiet moments, as we sat overlooking the Aegean Sea, that we made a decision we would move to Greece permanently after returning home. This wasn't just an escape, it was a fresh start, a chance to build a life untethered from the pain of my past. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. I realized something profound. I didn't need my family's approval to be happy. Their inability to respect my boundaries had once made me feel unworthy. But now I saw it for what it was. Their failing, not mine. On our last night in Santorini, I wrote a letter to my younger self, the girl who had cried over broken cameras, stolen savings, and endless favoritism. "You are enough," I wrote. "You deserve love, respect, and joy, not because of what you achieve or sacrifice, but simply because you exist." Tears streamed down my face as I sealed the letter, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't known was possible. Looking ahead, I felt a spark of optimism I hadn't felt in years. Our new life awaited, USA life, where I could wake up every day knowing I was valued, cherished, and loved. For the first time, I believed that happiness wasn't something I had to fight for. It was something I could create.